But I've been to Tulsa, yeah, with it was a conference when I was in grad school that we went there. My wife and I made like a trip, out of it and stayed a little longer, and it was a fantastic city. Loved living it, loved being in Tulsa. I
Oh,
guess
nice. Yeah.
there's once you go outside the city, there's not a whole lot there, but it's still, kind of very Americana in that sense.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I think that I mean it's got a lot of history. Like turn of the century, they're saying it could be like the Paris of the South.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that
And
kind
you
of that
can
was a big
feel that
thing.
when you're there. Like it could have, like
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
something about that city,
Uh-huh.
even way more than Oklahoma City. Like, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I'm in Dallas, and Dallas and Houston kind of have that thing where Dallas is thought to be maybe more a more beautiful city or more, kind of culture and stuff like that. And Houston is just like money and oil. And I think that's the way Tulsa feels about Oklahoma City. Like
Right.
they're Tulsa's the cultured one.
I lived in Lake Charles, Louisiana when I was in grad school for 3 years.
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah.
Houston was the closest like big city, 2 hours to the to the west, and
Oh yeah.
spending a lot of time there, I can concur that yeah, Dallas is definitely better than Houston. Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, to me, it just comes down to the weather. And I know it's hot here in Dallas, but it's just so even it's hotter and more humid in Houston and allergies. And now they've got floods and everything too. So it's just, I think Dallas has a leg up for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, I had a friend
Yeah.
from Dallas that I would always say, he's like, I don't know, man, East Texas. He's like, I mean, it's basically Louisiana, like,
Yeah.
like the weather
Yeah.
and all
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
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 Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy, heavy, heavy.
Bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No!
Resources.
Life, friends, is boring. We must not say so.
This is Andrew Whitstadt, and you were listening to Heavy Bored. And we're recording this on October 19th, 2024. My guest today is Stephen Harrison. Stephen is a writer, journalist, and lawyer with a focus on technology and its role in lawmaking and litigation. His work, fiction and nonfiction, has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Atlantic, Wired, and Slate, among many others. And he owns and operates a Substack page called Source Notes, which is linked in the description below, listeners. A place where you can find all of Stephen's writing, from short stories to journalism to book reviews and more. He holds degrees in literature, business, and law from the University of Texas and Washington University in St. Louis. And Stephen's writings and journalism cover everything from tech law to Olympic athletes to original fiction. And he holds a particular fascination with the role and influence of the online encyclopedia known as Wikipedia, something I know everyone listening is familiar with. But Stephen covers it from a little discussed perspective, covering what Wikipedia is used for today and how it affects our lives, research, scholarship, and beyond. And it is fascinating, listeners. His column for Slate focused exclusively on the topic for years. And it's the focus of his debut novel, The Editors, out from Inkshares just this summer, and available wherever books are sold, and, of course, is linked in the description of this podcast, listeners. But Stephen's fiction weaves together his legal expertise, his Wikipedia beat as a journalist, and just plain old-fashioned thriller elements that are rarely seen in contemporary fiction. Craig Newark, the founder of Craigslist, called the book seriously, genuinely, highly recommended. And it is a pleasure to welcome him on Heavy Board today. Stephen, thank you so much for coming on Heavy Board.
Andrew, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Of course. We love having writers on this for interviews. And I like to start this off with kind of a very broad question about what was your childhood like? Where did you grow up? What did your parents do? How did all of this lead to kind of start to form Stephen Harrison, the writer?
Yeah, I think so. I grew up mostly in Dallas. I was born in Tulsa. I think because my dad had a job in Muskogee, Oklahoma at the time, but he wanted me to be born in a hospital in a bigger city in Tulsa. And then for my dad's job, we moved to Dallas in when I was about 5. And just my childhood generally, I think maybe it's just because it's the title of the podcast. I think sometimes when I was bored, I wasn't part of the iPad generation or anything like that. I would come up with stories in my head. I would play a lot of I have a younger sister. We played like imaginary trips, which is where you kind of pretended to go. So the person going on the trip would have their eyes closed and you'd pretend to go to London. And so you'd have crumpets, or the recliner would suddenly turn into an airplane, and you're taking off on the trip. And so a lot of imaginary games, which I'm grateful for, because I think it's sort of an exercise for fiction. And then just in terms of writing, I've got when I think it hit me pretty young, because I was probably 6 or 7, and they did one of those questionnaires of what do you want to be when you grow up, and I said I wanted to be a author. So I was on the right track in terms of what I wanted to do. I just didn't know the grammar and syntax rules about a versus an. And so I've had that for a while. It was a good childhood, I'd say overall.
Yeah. Were you millennial, right? You're a millennial.
Yeah, I'm a millennial, 87. So maybe I'm an older millennial. I'm not sure.
I'm 89. Yeah. So it's the elder millennials, I said, as we start to, every time I ask kind of a millennial author that too, it's like, they always describe, obviously, like, I mean, obviously some people didn't have idyllic childhoods, but almost everyone I talk to, especially ones that, become writers or something, like the childhood is almost idyllic. Like you have games, you're playing with your siblings. Yeah, this was pre-internet taking over everything, pre-iPads, screen time. Nobody was concerned about screen time or anything like that. The worst I remember is like high school, when like MySpace was becoming a thing, and then we had to have like parent teacher meetings about what people were posting to MySpace. Little did we know what that would become, but yeah, I love hearing that, because I don't know. I mean, of course, there's always people out there that have, awful situations, but I was like, it's always interesting that like millennials, we had some of the most idyllic. Everybody says like, oh, the 50s were idyllic. It's like, the 90s, early 2000s, pretty idyllic for most of us here.
Right. I think that's right on technology. The one thing that I'd say is a little bit different is, do you remember the Left Behind books? They were very popular. Okay, so it's a kind of an Armageddon series that was really popular for a while, about like what's going to happen with the rapture. And so I think sometimes reading those in like middle school and high school, I was like, this is kind of scary. It's a kind of fiction that was very popular then, that's not less popular now. So, and especially in religious communities.
And were your parents in the industries and stuff down there in Oklahoma and all that? Like, kind of grew up with the oil industries or the farming industries and cattle stuff down there, or?
Yeah, no. So my mom, she's an accountant, but she ended up working for a community college in kind of financial aid. And so I guess the education industry for her. And then my dad, he is a lawyer. He was a prosecutor. So he more of a criminal prosecutor. So a different, not exactly connected to oil and gas. I think everything in Texas is indirectly connected,
Right.
but it was just different industries.
Absolutely. I guess we're going to get to your legal career as well, but yeah, you hinted at this. When did reading and writing come into your life? Like you said, it was kind of early on. So again, kind of the books when you're in middle school and stuff, and you're really kind of getting into this. Yeah, when did that come into your life?
Well, even before, I think I was reading. Have you heard of The Indian in the Cupboard, the Henry Banks series?
Yes.
Yeah, those were, and maybe that's the 90s idyllic childhood that we're talking about. Yeah, that, The Castle in the Attic. And I think I did do sort of fan fiction of let's continue The Indian in the Cupboard. What if, he brought to life, instead of an Indian, it's and so the premise of the book is that the kid can bring these toys to life, and they become real figures from history. And I was like, well, what if it's like a Roman gladiator, or just adding to it. But I think, okay, let's see, reading and writing seriously. I do remember I had a really great English school or middle school English teacher, and we read Mark Twain then, and I remember thinking Huckleberry Finn is just great. Like, it's just and it was very adult. It was uncensored at the time. We were reading the real thing. And I had an amazing Shakespeare teacher in high school who was just so passionate about it. So I think that this idea of reading, kind of that was a big part of my childhood and my education. And when I was applying for scholarships, for college, I knew I needed to, if I wanted to go to some of these schools, just needed to get a little bit more in the way of scholarship to be able to afford them. And so I was applying to all kinds of scholarships. But I think that maybe one way that should have been a tip that I was most interested in this is they had a creative writing scholarship program at WashU in St. Louis. And I probably, maybe spent 100 hours on that application. And my chemistry one, I was just like, oh, let's just see if this works, without even particularly being having that much of an interest in chemistry. And so I think that so I minored in creative writing in college. They didn't have a major in it where I went to school. And, I think that, so reading, writing, just always kind of been a big part of what I'm interested in.
In Washington, was that your undergrad study?
Yeah, that's my
St.
undergrad.
Louis there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They have great creative writing teachers there, like unbelievable staff. I guess.
Yeah. Who is it? Clemenchesky, I know, is big. Marshall Clemenchesky.
Carl Phillips.
Mary Jo Banks.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Just incredible staff. So, I mean, that's you're in good company going to a school, especially minoring in creative writing like that. Was your major literature or business or?
Yeah, so what I did is I did a double major of English and finance, which is kind of just shows the split that I've always had. Partly I wasn't sure what job I'd be able to get with just the English degree, and I think also it was pre-recession, but towards the end the recession was looming. It's like, okay, I need to find a job, but I think I've always had that split between the kind of creative, maybe I would say the humanities part of my brain and kind of business and that side of things.
Yeah, that's rare. It's always either or, right? It's like one or the other. Usually it's always rare when you get somebody that's doing both or can do both or is interested in both even, when people are like, oh, I don't like math, I'm an arts guy or something, but it's like, well, you need both. So yeah, again, that speaks to that, listeners. You see the unique perspective we're getting here.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think I still have to sometimes muscle my way through math, but I'm one of those people who can find something interesting about a lot of different topics, whether it's finance and I think that some of the stories that I got about my colleagues in like the business school environment were pretty interesting. It's just good material for later writing down the lines, hopefully.
Yeah, and I want to get to that too. Yeah, how it kind of perfectly suited you for journalism and all that.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of the first writers you were enamored with, or your kind of, who are your go-to inspirations in terms of like literature and stuff? Like, who are the writers that you can remember? Like, I know a lot. It's hard to pick a few, but like, just who are the first ones that you can remember being just absolutely enamored with? That like, I think I want to be a writer.
Yeah, for sure. I was really into John Irving, and I had read the Cider House Rules, but then mostly The World According to Garp. This is probably the summer right before college, and I was like, I didn't even know you could do so much with a novel. And I think the reason I liked it is because it was kind of the 19th century novel, like a Dickens frame, but it was set in modern time, pretty much modern times, right? And actually, that novel is very interesting because it gets into a lot of the stuff we're talking about today with gender and sexuality and stuff like that. But I think it was published. Listeners could probably check me, but I believe it's published in the 70s, right? It's so John Irving was interesting. And what's actually kind of interesting is I've been less interested in his more recent work, and I think that sometimes the really, really long novels, I'm not liking them the way that I did, in high school. I don't know. There's just it's a different style. I did have a little bit, and I've been thinking about this lately. I had maybe another summer where I read a lot of Michael Crichton. Prey, and what else was it? Jurassic Park, of course. And that's just a totally different style. But I think that in my latest writing, I've been like, well, hey, I've got kind of a mental memory of like, well, how did he describe the, this particular scene or like a fight scene? And I can pull the book and like look at that section, just to see, kind of the way he did it. Let's see. I had a lot of writers that I was into. I had a Hemingway phase. What's the joke? It's like a bad Hemingway phase. Yeah, but I still like Hemingway. I kind of defend Hemingway on some things. He probably my favorite of those is The Sun Also Rises. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting about that, as I was reading it before, college, before like drinking and all the stuff that is like such a big feature of that book. The Farewell to Arms, Death in the Afternoon, and The Pearl and things like that. So I'd say, let's say Hemingway, and and Faulkner was a big influence. I think that was an English professor who got me really interested in Faulkner. We read The Sound and the Fury, and then I read As I Lay Dying, and so. Yeah, those are a few big ones. Yeah,
I love when Faulkner comes up too. It's like it's almost impossible to like be into literature without getting hit with Faulkner, and you read that for the first time. It's almost like, oh my God, what a master! Like it's so few things come close to the level he was able to do, like achieve with all of his stuff. That is incredible. Yeah, he's like one of those ones that's like on the pedestal for sure for me, with the looking up, being like, if I could ever do something close to that. Crichton, we're huge fans of Crichton on this podcast, and Stephen King and writers like that.
Sure,
I'm a big defender of the pop genre and like its influence over the more literary stuff as well. Yeah, and Hemingway, of course, is always have to mention that, because again, it's impossible to go through school studying English and being interested in English without bumping up against a lot of these icons in the industry. So it's always like we like to ask that of guests. Yeah, like what got you started, how that goes.
Yeah. I think the more recent thing that I've been doing is, well, I mean, there are many reasons that a writer should read, but I mean, one of them is you just have this mental model, and you're like, okay, I want to, like, I remember this scene of when the character finds out the news, and for whom the bell tolls, or whatever, and you pull up you can look at it, and it can help you think about the way you might want to do a similar scene, and you're going to do it differently because you're a different writer. But I think that's just yet another reason to read. And I think Crichton's also like that too, because I have a vivid memory of certain scenes, probably because I read it like when I was much younger.
Yeah. And it leaves an impression, and I think you can see that in your work too, where you kind of, the best stuff blends those kind of literary Hemingway, Faulkner, and all Irving, these kind of things, with this popular element, the kind of thriller element, like Crichton and King and all these other I know you didn't mention King, but I'm a big Stephen King head, so I'm always.
I am too, and the what is it, Rita Skeeter and the Shawshank Redemption? That's a really good book too, in addition to being a good movie. And it's different. It's different. Yeah. I like it. Yeah.
And with interviews with stuff like that, you can tell he wrote that kind of as like, I'm more than just like a horror thriller guy. Like I can write you a classic novel, and he did, and like it's become this beloved thing.
Yeah, no, it's good. Yeah, it's a solid one, and it's that narrator's voice sticks with you. Yeah, absolutely.
And I wanted to ask this: what made you want to become a lawyer? You mentioned your father was a lawyer. Was that something that you were just kind of, I don't want to say family business, but like what inspired you to go to law school? I mean, that's daunting, to.
Yeah. I it's one of those things where I kind of, I don't know if I had fully thought it out at the time. I'm like 22, whatever years old. I had applied to some creative writing programs, and the programs that I really wanted to get into, they were the fully funded ones I wasn't getting into. And I think also I needed to, grow as a writer and have a better portfolio and things like that. And that was kind of discouraging, I would say. But I was, looking back, I was applying like right out of college, right? And so I had a year. I kind of got like a low-key publishing job, like here in Dallas, as an educational publisher. I was living with my parents, and I was thinking, well, could I do law school, and could I kind of pursue both writing and law, and but I think that I felt a lot of pressure. It was the recession. I was thinking to myself, I was literally thinking I could wait out the recession while in law school, and maybe it'd be better. That's something, I think the pandemic is affecting Gen Z so much, right? It hit them the influential time, college and high school for a lot of them. But the recession was that big life event, like at a pretty early age, because it was just really hard to get jobs anywhere. In any field or anything. And so I went to law school, and and then I was like, well, what kind of types of law would I find interesting? And I think it took me a while, but like the technology transactions that I do now that relate to things like copyright and AI to some extent. It's a lot of contract drafting and negotiations and things like that. That's an area that I find like really interesting, and I think because it uses a different part of my brain than my creative writing brain, I can kind of I can kind of do both, right? We'll see. At some point, maybe I'll go more one direction or the other, just focus fully on the writing or focus fully on the law. But for now, it seems to be working.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people underestimate how much writing, and not creative writing, but you have to be a little creative when you're doing that kind of stuff. When you're writing out. I worked at a law firm for a little while, with my English degree, and I was basically just like a glorified, paralegal assistant. I was just writing demand letters and all day, things like that. And you do have to be a little creative with that language and how you interpret, what the case is and all that. It does require a little creativity, a different type, obviously, because you're not creating something out of nothing. But it's yeah, I think that people underestimate how well that translates. And you look at all the people that are lawyers turned writers. I mean, it translates really well into kind of a creative writing field too. So I'm curious, because that's a lot of different things. Yeah, being a lawyer, a journalist on top of it, and a writer. But yeah, you've worked as a lawyer and a journalist, and now you're a fiction writer. So which came first in your life, the journalism or the fiction, and which do you prefer?
Ooh, good question. I think that out of all of them, the thing I most stumbled into was the journalism, and we could talk about how that happened. But I think I've always gravitated the most towards fiction. I think I've just got, whether I want to or not, and I think, a lot of creative people are kind of like, oh, it's like a blessing and a curse. I've just got like stories kind of running in my head all the time, kind of story ideas, and the ideas are in some ways the easy part. It's the execution. You need to like sit down and write and, take the year or two to get the book out and make it good. That's actually really hard. So I think that just by nature, I'm a little bit more of a fiction writer, like a novelist. I think that, I think about the sort of the aesthetics or like the beauty or the dramatic potential of the story the most. The journalism, and specifically Wikipedia journalism, happened in like kind of a very specific fluke way, but I think that it's nonfiction. I try to write a lot of those it's nonfiction, it's reporting, but there's always like a story to it, right? The story of the week, and so they kind of go together. And then I think that what's very funny is that you really have to do the flip between journalism and fiction, like in a nonfiction journalism piece, when you're describing like what's going on Wikipedia this week, you have to have the nut graph, and you guys have to be really clear, like here's the issue. Whereas fiction, you can't do that. It's, you all the things like show don't tell, or you just have to like describe the story. You can't just like serve it in a very clear journalistic way to the reader. Anyway, I think some people can do both. We've been talking about Hemingway and Faulkner, but I have to make a real shift when I'm going between the two.
Right. What is that shift like in terms of like mentality for writing that? Like, or if you could describe it. I know it's hard to describe that stuff. Yeah.
Oh, good question. Yeah, I think, well, and I know listeners can't see us, but I'm at my desk. This is the desk that I use and I work from home. So this is the desk that I use for my legal work. And over here to the right, which again, I know you can't see, is my writing desk. So I literally do have two different desks, Yeah. And that one looks out a little bit more towards the window. I'm looking at right now. I've got a few books on it, and I've got like yellow legal pads. I know like I heard James Patterson uses those too. I do a lot of like free writing or outlining and stuff like that. Stuff that I wouldn't do with like contract drafting as much. I think that I do have when I do journalistic writing, I pretty much do have like sometimes I literally make myself, I'm like, okay, I'm going to spend 4 hours on this, but before I do that, I'm going to spend 15 minutes like outlining the piece, and it's just bullets. Like I need to make this point, and actually this point flows from this point, And so my journalism is pretty structured. Also, sometimes it's kind of strange because it's online writing, but sometimes they do give you a word count like 800 to 1,200 words, so you can't go on and on and on forever, right? And then the last thing that I would say, and I've just started talking about this more, and so it might be kind of half-baked as a concept, but I think that fiction writing to me is a little bit more of a pull energy. Like I'm just pulling it from somewhere, and it's just kind of like wait and see what comes out. Whereas nonfiction journalism is like, okay, I've read a lot about this now. I've watched what's going on Wikipedia for a week, and now I've got it, and now just push what I've learned, or push it out. And so that kind of push-pull is, to me, a difference between fiction versus nonfiction writing.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you have even separate spaces to do it
Oh, I
in. Like,
definitely need
yeah,
them. Yeah, yeah.
because
And
it
I could do
is.
journalism over here, but I can't do fiction over here in
Yeah.
this specific spot.
The poet Ted
uh,
Kooser in his little,
uh,
craft book that he wrote years ago, he always said, like, he's like, that's important, having a space for it, like a little carved out space. People always talk about time, and yeah, the time's an important part too. You got to carve out a little time for it out of your schedule and all that, because most writers have to have a day job. But like, he said when he started, his wife and he had, like, a little 1 bedroom apartment, so there was no office, there was no like separate space for him to work in. They said that he got like a box when they ordered their dining room table, like a big box that you could like fit in. So he just set that up in the corner and would go into the box, literally sit in the box with like a notebook, cross leg in the box or whatever. He said that was my little writing space until he could move on and afford an actual desk and stuff like that. But it's so important, because I think it's always interesting too, like because like if you write fiction, they're like, oh well, can you write movie scripts, can you write journalism, can you do this? Like they just ask you to do all these other things that aren't fiction, but it's like it is kind of a different mental process in a lot of this, so it's important. I just, yeah, I love that. I love that answer, essentially. Yeah, having
oh
physically
yeah,
separate spaces.
yeah. And I don't do it so much with revising, but sometimes in initial drafts of well, in the novel, when I was like just free writing, some chapters, I would go to a coffee shop, local coffee shop, and they actually became like my friends and fans. I was like, hey, how's it going? And they were excited when the book came out. But then one time a friend like wanted to meet up for a conversation there, and I was like, this is not my chatting about life place. This is my writing place. And so I was like, let's go have a drink somewhere. We did it for a few minutes and it felt wrong, so we went to a different place. And then I was getting really particular. I was like, there's even a particular booth in this coffee shop that I liked, and if I got there early enough, I could get that booth. But yeah, I think the writing rituals, and I love that box thing, because if you've got a small place, you have to make it work somehow, whether it's a box or whatever.
Yeah, it's important. Those little tiny things matter so much. They matter so much when it comes to something like writing. Like, yeah. So I love that. Yeah. This brings us to your more journalism, your beat, so to speak, right? The Wikipedia beat. Yeah. So why Wikipedia? What draws you to Wikipedia as kind of a source for your journalism and your fiction? With this novel, at least in the novel, the editors. I know hopefully there's more to come, right, in the fiction realm. But why Wikipedia? Yeah.
So I kind of always just come back to this sort of mystery that's always been with me, or has been with me the last couple of years. But I was in New York on a business trip when I was working at a different company, and I was so this would have been 2017, and I was thinking, when was the subway built? I didn't really know when the subway was built, and it was probably the Texas or Oklahoman in me just not knowing about the history of these things. And so I was reading the Wikipedia articles on the subway itself, on the different lines of the subway, and each different subway station. And I thought to myself, wow, these are so good. And I was, again, on a business trip. I was like, I have a full-time job. Who has the time to write these? And I reached out to the two usernames I saw were the most active, or the most recently active on the page. And I reached out to them and said, hey, could I interview you for this story? Because I just think that these pages are really high quality. I'd like to know who you are. And one of them wrote back is like, yeah, that's fine, but let me ask my mom. And I had no idea, because literally I had a conception. I thought it was a middle-aged, maybe 50-year-old man or whatever that was working on these. But these were two younger guys. One was in high school, one was in college. They're both in Queens. They never actually met, even though they communicate all the time, online and on this platform. And so, but I had a little bit of a, kind of change in my thinking. Originally, I was like, this is really neat. This is kind of, these young, and they're doing a great job. But also, it's like, they're not the public transportation experts. They're not and they're doing these things these pages that, I think at one point, like 1 million people had read this one particular article. So it's a pretty big audience. So just this idea of sort of unmasking or getting to know the editors and who they are as people just always like stood with me. And then kind of larger point, I just think it's such an important information resource. I just, for a pretty long time, thought that it would make a good setting for a suspense novel. And it took a while to figure out the story to do, and like how to get it in there as a story. But I just had like a gut feeling that it'd make a really good setting. In the same way that, like, I don't know, The Hunt for Red October, like no one had really written that much about submarines before then, right? Or I mean, they had, but that's like the main one. It's like it's a good setting, and so you figure out the story that kind of brings that setting to life.
Absolutely. It's very millennial too. It's like kind of like Wikipedia, and I want to get to this too. Yeah. With kind of like, millennials usually, we don't use papers encyclopedias, whereas like the old way was like, yeah, if you wanted to know the history of the New York subway, you'd have to go to the Library of Congress and do all, days, years probably worth of research. Whereas now you just type it into a search engine and you get Wikipedia is usually one of the top results. But like, I wanted to ask you, like, what do you see as Wikipedia's role in the world today? And this could be anything, kind of good, bad, important, unimportant, somewhere in between. Is there an over-reliance on it? Like, because I know there's criticisms of Wikipedia, and then obviously there's great things about it too. So just, how do you see Wikipedia kind of fitting into like this, because there is like, I think people underestimate, like, there is pre-internet world and there is post-internet world. Like there is a dividing line, and maybe it was, and it was very much in our generation when it happened, where like kind of there is a divide, and like and obviously there's no going back, but like, where do you see the kind of role of Wikipedia in the world? And I know this is a broad question, so again, go at it.
No, it's the question. And I think if you've got a lot of thoughts on it, maybe you write a book about or inspired by Wikipedia. That's kind of what I think. I think that I see Wikipedia sort of as like this critical information infrastructure, because of course Wikipedia answers, or the content that's on Wikipedia, if you Google someone, that you see an extract of Wikipedia, or a lot of times journalists, frankly, and I've done it myself, I don't copy the exact thing from Wikipedia, but that's going to be part of my initial research, and then I'm going to go a little deeper and find actual sources or more in-depth sources. But I mean, that's just the fact, right? So that it kind of shapes the reality of journalistic coverage. And then of course now with ChatGPT, Alexa, Siri, things like that, they and it might go off here if I say the word too loud, but they are informed by the Wikipedia content, right? So it matters what's on that site, but it's collaboratively written. It's not written, in the old Encyclopedia Britannica way by this panel of experts who, has credentials in this field. And although we could say there are a lot of flaws with that model too. I mean, for one, it goes really, really slow, and it's not immediately available, and it was gate-kept in the sense that not everyone could access it freely. And I think that it does represent, we were talking earlier about the idyllic 90s childhood, that there's also like the early 2000s internet, where the internet has a lot of potential, and like, what could it do for humanity, and like, a great humanitarian project. Because you just have to say, the idea of Wikipedia really is beautiful, right? I mean, like, it's like free information for people that goes all around the world, and it's trying to be an accurate resource, and most people are doing it as a labor of love, like they're just interested in it and they're volunteering, or they're just like the idea. I mean, they're classically nerdy in the sense that they like compiling the encyclopedia and writing it. Now we could talk about people who've got bad motives too, and state actors that I don't think are doing good with it. And I think that some people try to monetize it in the same way that the whole internet, at the beginning, the internet wasn't even thought to be like this great commercial platform, and then a lot of people thought it should be like nonprofit. It was a university creation, right? Or a military and university creation. And then now in the new internet, it's like everything is so monetized. You talk to Gen Z, they don't even really have the idea of selling out, because they think everybody sells out, right?
Right, yeah.
So I think Wikipedia represents a lot of things. But it's messy, and I think I wouldn't be a very good writer if I was just like, it's just perfect, this perfect site that works perfectly and always tells the truth about everything. So I try to cover both the good and the bad where I can. That's probably a long answer to your question, but I have like I said, a lot of thoughts about Wikipedia.
Yeah, we love long answers on this podcast. Yeah, because I think because Wikipedia it is the go-to, right? Like if you don't know something, if you read the Wikipedia article, you do get kind of a crash course. And
Sure.
the negative is you don't know how accurate that is necessarily unless you dig a little deeper. And I remember in college specifically, and this was for me like kind of 2008, 2013-ish kind of era, where it was like there was almost like a war about Wikipedia as a source, and people were like, "Oh, don't use Wikipedia, don't use Wikipedia," and I understood why, but then if the actual sources that are listed at the bottom of the page are actually pretty great resources for just to start at least, like somebody like millennials, we'd be like, well, actually, if you go down to all the way to the bottom of the page, the sources that are linked, you can click those links and you can start your research. Like it's actually like not a bad jumping off point. And I don't use it for all your research, but like, it is cited. Like it is kind of this, like you can click that link and it pops up. I guess some of them are paywalled, some of them aren't, but like in those early days, like there was that kind of push and pull between like, can you use this as a source? Can you use it as a jumping off point? Or are you just kind of, or is it just an internet forum? Like the kind of older generation was kind of treating it as if, oh, it's just an internet forum and people can say whatever they want. And there is truth to that. Sure. Like people can say whatever they want on it, but it's also actually does give some accurate information, a lot of accurate information actually. So yeah, I mean, I was fascinated going through your Substack about like all of the different ways that you've approached it. So I was just fascinated, like, yeah, like kind of the reliance on Wikipedia about so much of this stuff. And like you wrote an interesting piece a few years ago about future historians relying on Wikipedia for things like COVID, and other major events,
Yeah.
like go into a little bit of your ideas on that.
Well, I mean, first of all, that's just kind of a neat idea to me. Like it's my Star Trek side or whatever.
Yeah.
Like we're here. What are the historians going to say about this time? Culturally, economically, politically. Just that kind of thing. But I think thinking like a historian or a historian of the future, what kind of evidence or kind of artifacts would they be looking at? And I think Wikipedia would be a pretty interesting artifact because you could see. And I did, the research for the book and just for my own edification, like when the pandemic, or actually when the virus was first identified in China in Wuhan province, what were they saying? And I think that there was a lot of confusion at the time that they didn't, people didn't know, but you could, on Wikipedia has an edit log. So you can see every edit and it's like, okay, this was the first time someone said it's a variation of SARS. This is the first time someone called it a breed of pneumonia. This is the first time that someone actually officially used the word pandemic on Wikipedia. And so I think the historians can kind of look at it and see the debates. You can see it on, very sensitive cultural topics like the George Floyd, and issues and the murder, and then also the protests that year. You could see the coverage, and can we use this source? Can we use that source? And I think that for a historian, that's a tool that they didn't have. They didn't have that in the pre-internet era. Right. There's just kind of like a dominant narrative that emerged, and you didn't even get to see the discussion that was taking place. And so I think Wikipedia is like pretty useful for historians, just because it's not just the data that's on an article. I mean, the text of an article changes all the time. You can see the whole edit history for all of these articles and the username that's associated with that edit. And a lot of times they give an edit memo and they say why they made the change. Sometimes they don't. And then now I'm, just when I wrote that piece, that was even a few years ago now I'd think, well, what if you had an AI look at the edit history? Because as a human, and sometimes when I was a journalist, I was like, this is taking me a really long time to see what's going on in the edit history. But you could have an AI identify, like, well, here are the main trends or the main arguments that are being raised on a particular Wikipedia article. And that's kind of cool to think about.
Yeah, and it is kind of, I always think of that like Futurama episode where they go to the Natural History Museum and like they have like humans riding dinosaurs and stuff like that. Like the information was lost at some point, and like they just kind of filled in the gaps with stuff. And I said that's a joke, but it's also like, yeah, and I guess there's all that stuff about Internet Archive. I don't follow it that much, but the stuff that's going on with the Internet Archive and all that, like the website that had, the entire history of the internet essentially on it, But like, yeah, like I said, those won't last forever, right? Like if it's a single website with a couple servers supporting it, like if that goes, like there is a huge loss. And then what do we have? We have this kind of nonprofit like Wikipedia, that is holding the kind of history of the internet in a certain sense. And I think that's just such a fascinating way to look at it. And yeah, I mean, and again, using it as a source, like for that too, like even if just a timeline source, like that is invaluable. And I think people aren't looking at it that way. When people are either like, oh, Wikipedia is garbage, or Wikipedia is just, random people that are editing these things and you don't know what they're doing or what their motivations are. But then it's like, well, if you use it for a little, not the total source of information, but this timeline, it gives you a record. It gives you more than you would think. And it's so fascinating to me, like how it's changed over the years too. When it first came on, and like I said, I remember in college, it was like a huge kind of battle about using it as a source or starting your research there instead of going to a library. And now you have great journalistic articles about how actually, historians are probably going to use this as, at the very least, for a timeline, if not more. And it's just
Sure. And
yeah.
the technology's changed too since, you and I were in college. I mean, like, we would sometimes have, or my friends on my dorm floor would sometimes prank a Wikipedia page, add something just outrageous, and see how long. And I think now with people have smartphones and certain articles, I mean, they have like 50,000 watchers. People are watching them, right? And I was talking to this one ER doctor in Canada, and he specializes in heart attacks, and like he watches the article. It's either heart attacks or like the signs or symptoms of a heart attack, because he knows that if he can get the information right there, then he can help people go into the emergency room, at the appropriate time, right? And so that article is going to be really accurate because he and a lot of others who are specialists are watching it like hawks. Now, I think that sometimes, other articles get a lot less visibility, or they're not people who actually know what they're talking about that are maintaining them. And so, yeah, sometimes I think people ask me, not you, of course, but like other people ask me like a gotcha question, like, is Wikipedia trustworthy? I was like, well, it depends on the article. It depends on, it's a massive like institution, and there's elements of it that are reliable and elements that are not. That's just kind of the system that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the millennial in me.
Yeah.
I understand. Yeah, that it's not just
Yeah.
it's not so simple. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then the Gen Z, we at least have the memory of the Britannica or like the World Book era that you could get at their encyclopedia model is Wikipedia, right? And so it's and they maybe have a different view of what's encyclopedic as a result. Like we might think, okay, well, what was important enough to get in the Britannica that's on the shelves, right? The with a one book per each letter. But the Gen Z generation might say, well, we're not limited by paper, or we never even thought about it in terms of paper. And so they might think of a topic that's, less notable. That subject should still have a Wikipedia entry, and they say, well, if you delete that entry, then you're gatekeeping. So I don't know. It's a different way of thinking about it. Yeah.
Gatekeeping is interesting. I didn't prepare for this, but just kind of, it is something that I think the whole world is struggling with, and specifically kind of the publishing industries and stuff. So like and I consider the internet part of the publishing industry now. That's kind of a struggle between it. I have a few questions about this, but not this specifically.
Yeah, totally.
Just kind of the gatekeeping aspect, because it's complicated, right? Like it's not so easy. Like gatekeeping is required, right? Because we don't just want total, crazy people doing certain things, or like there's like a standard level that we want to try and keep. But that's changed so much now, and that there is this constant struggle that I do see with kind of younger. Oh, you're gatekeeping this. It's like, yeah, we're gatekeeping it so that you don't get your hands on it and fuck it up. Okay, there is some level of that has to happen. But then also we do want like a kind of a free and open source of information. So it is this balancing act that I don't know. What do you think of that? Like in terms of, I know gatekeeping is really broad,
well, I'm kind of like you. When I first heard people using it, and maybe Gen Z individuals using it, I was like, well, what do you even mean by gatekeeping? Because it kind of means the different things in like different contexts. Are you like gatekeeping your contacts, or the people that you reach out to when you're trying to write a piece? Or it's like, there's that kind of piece. It's like there's not really that, but then there's also just the example that comes to mind is someone asked me, well, what will happen next pandemic? And I was like, well, I could see a world where, I mean, local journalism especially, but journalism nationally is just, there are a lot of journalists that don't have jobs, right? They're getting laid off. That industry has been collapsing. And what I think is really interesting is there were more layoffs between 2014 and 2024 than there were between 2004 and 2014, right? So it's like it's the rate of acceleration
Right.
of decline in the journalism industry. Like there's just not an economic model there. So why does that matter? Well, Wikipedia doesn't allow like self-published sources like Substacks and blogs and
Right.
things like that. So let's say there's another pandemic, you know, sequel to the novel, right? No, just in the future. but the Wikipedia would, without those like reliable sources, you know, is it going to have to change its rules and allow like Substacks and newsletters to be, you know, to be the sources that can be used on the encyclopedia? And so the current quote unquote gatekeeping of traditional media, whether you like it or not, I think it's under stress because of the economics of journalism. And anyway, but I think it's whenever I hear the word gatekeeping, especially if it's done as a criticism or something like that, in like a journalistic piece, I would be like, well, what do you actually really mean? Like, what's being gatekept? Who are the gatekeepers? Is it this amorphous group, or do you have like specific individuals that you think are gatekeeping the information? And then lastly, I guess I'd just say that when Wikipedia or Infopedia in the book is not Twitter, it's not X, it's not, those I think are intended to be free expression platforms. Like people can put things up and no one can delete it. Now they have community notes. You can flag a tweet as with an issue, but who knows how that works or if it's very effective. But when you put something that's just egregiously wrong on Wikipedia, that's going to get deleted, and that's not a free speech violation. It's just the goal of the encyclopedia is to try to have an accurate information resource. And of course, people are going to disagree on that, but at least the framework is heading more, theoretically, everyone should be heading in the same direction. We're trying to make a trustworthy encyclopedia. So there is some gatekeeping. There's some protection. There's a patrol of misinformation, right? That's one of the characters in the book is doing that. Yeah.
It's required for especially things like publishing. Yeah.
Yeah.
But this, I did want to ask you about this. I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I think this is a perfect segue with, I wanted to ask you about social media and kind of its effect on the world and its place more broadly, and I know this is something you've written about, but, not just it being used as a source for information, but like kind of what it's done to our culture and society and even what it's done to writers and publishing that you were kind of talking about, like, the economic model, I think, is kind of blowing up for a lot of journalism and publishing and all of that. But I think social media has a lot to do with that, or at least what do you think of that in terms of? And I know, your book was blurred by Taylor Lorenz, right? Like kind of her beat is social media journalism, and it is kind of what are your thoughts on that? Like kind of how social media plays into this, and I mean that specifically in terms of like how it creates or even denigrates Wikipedia as a reliable source and kind of other stuff, right? Like where people are getting things. And like you said, not using Substacks. Substack is essentially social media, right? Like kind of like a more long form version of it. Like I don't know. I feel like everything's social media. Like I taught college for many years, like as an adjunct instructor, and it was even that, like the kind of Blackboard, Canvas, the kind of, learning softwares that they have used, even that is like social media. It's a feed. You log in and it's a feed and you have comments and you talk and you go back and forth. YouTube is social media now. It's a feed that the algorithm plugs things into you and you can comment and like and share and kind of in their version of retweeting or something like that. And yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Like how social media plays into all this, gatekeeping and the kind of economic models and all of that. I know that's a big question.
Well, it is a big question. Well, you got me thinking about the Blackboard thing, and I'm probably going to be thinking about that even after the podcast. Blackboard as like social media, and because it's like chats underneath like a YouTube video, right? And that's just different. I mean, I've got, one of my favorite papers or like a short story that I wrote in that creative writing program talking about. I've got like the editorial letter of like, you did good on this, like keep working on your dialogue or this, like that kind of thing. And I guess someone could like print out and keep your Blackboard comments as a letter, but I don't know if they do, right? It seems like it's more temporary. It's so ephemeral, like, and that's what I worry about, the whole internet culture. I mean, the Internet Archive's down. You can't even save it, forever if you want to right now. I mean, I think that what I worry about is how do you define content? I even have a character in the book who's just like very concerned about like, I write journalism, I'm just not like a content creator, right?
Yeah.
I think that, and I think that her arc of the story, she does need to kind of get into the new, new way of thinking about things if she's going to be successful as a journalist, full-time journalist. But I think that content, social media, a lot of times, it just always seems like it's a game, right? And it's like, is the purpose of it to communicate trustworthy information, or is it to like engage people? So like the New York Times, I think that they did their list of the top 100 novels of the 21st century, and a lot of people thought, people had a lot of criticisms of it.
As always,
my criticism was like none of the books even really involve the internet, which is kind of wild, for this era. But I would say that's in some ways more content than journalism, if you have to make a distinction, because it's trying to create a game with the population of readers, and they're saying, well, no, you didn't even have this book in the top 100. This book sucks. This book's, not sufficiently, the list itself is not meeting whatever diversity or other requirements we think are important. And
if you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right, Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, Jerk Shop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard.
So I was like, okay, well, that's just like content in the sense of you're just trying to engage people, right? And it's not like, journalism is like, I would phrase it as, just describing, accurately describing or reporting on a situation or a news event. That's the purpose. It's an accurate representation. And content, I think, is like engagement with the public, right? Like if you were to poll someone and say, which outfit should I wear on a vacation? That's not journalism. That's content, right?
Right.
And so I do worry. It's like, and I mean, it was a big question, like you said, but I had gotten this. He's a Substacker, Ted Joya, but I got in this idea from him, and I'm just kind of been expanding on it, I think, a little bit, or mulling over it, I should say. But he said that, the dominant mode of culture for a long time was the novel, and that influenced everything, right? So, for example, art, it had to like tell a story. It'd be like the Annunciation or like some sort of religious scene, right? Because the novel, the story was the model, and so they wanted to have narrative art. And then I think the modern art was trying, or postmodern certainly, was trying to rebel against that, saying we can do visual art that doesn't tell a story. But now I think that, if the dominant mode is TikTok of culture, is like TikTok short form videos, then it affects everything, right? Maybe, I feel perfectly fine in this podcast, but in another podcast I might be like, I need to go really fast to get sound bites, for TikTok. It would influence it. Or I would maybe my, the next novel I'm working on, maybe I feel like, every chapter can only be like 3 pages because people don't have, good attention spans anymore because of TikTok, right? So I think that I do in social media, it's in the air, and it influences our literature. It influences our, so I think we need to at least, I don't want to cheapen my art or something because of it, but I also think that denying it is sort of denying the reality in which we live. And we can get to this too. You kind of have to make your own social media. Even if it was like an older era where the publishing house is just throwing a lot of money into your marketing, you kind of just need to, do your own social media now. That's just what's expected. That's what works. And I think that's a real challenge for authors, because doing social media well takes a lot of time, and writing well takes a lot of time, and we have day jobs. So I think, I think we're all kind of, in families and all the other things. And so I think that it certainly impacts authors, this new, well, now it's existed for a long time, but the social media world that we're in. hyper social media.
But yeah, I mean, comparatively, it is new, right? Like, I mean, even though, yeah, it's been around for a while, like there was a point where it did kind of consume the world, kind of. Maybe it was the pandemic that accelerated that or something when we all had to use that. But I think, especially for something like journalism, right? Like you said, or authors and writers, if you're not on social media, you're not being heard. Like nobody knows who you are. And then that starts to affect, you know, if people know your name, well, you're more likely to be able to sell an article to some place that's going to, I mean, you're never getting a lot of money, but, you know, more money than you would other places. So if you're selling it to the Atlantic or the New York Times or something, you're getting, you know, the $1,200 or whatever. But it's still like, if you're not doing that, well, you really don't stand a chance, you know, of even, you know, elbowing your way in there. And it's always been kind of a cutthroat industry in terms of who gets, you know, the book deals, who gets published where, you know, how often and all of that. But, yeah, I'm always fascinated by, and again, this isn't a podcast where we're looking for definitive answers or anything like that or something like this, but it is just, it's become so important to the point where I see people chasing it, particularly in publishing. And one of my theories is I see, instead of kind of taste and judgment kind of driving what always drove the kind of publishing and journalistic kind of fields, we're now trend chasing, where there's kind of like, oh, there's a new trend on TikTok or Twitter or whatever it is, and we have to keep up with it. We have to keep up with it. You know, we need a hot take on this. We need to have something going against this, something going for it, you know, so that we have engagement or readership being, you know, kept interested and stuff. And I think, like you said, it is a matter of being honest about the world we live in, where it is a matter of like, this is the reality now, and we have to be careful. And if you have to kind of be very cautious, you know, about how you're doing that, how you come off, where you choose to pick your battles, you know, and I mean, people do this, right? You see it, it's a phenomenon, I think, that people talk about, but it isn't taken as seriously, where you get into it with somebody, a total stranger on social media. That could take up days of your life.
Sure.
If you're a journalist that spent so much time and energy on something to like make it accurate, make it good, and publish it out there, and then all of a sudden you have these random people just kind of berating you with, oh, this exception actually here, and then they're citing sources sometimes from Wikipedia or whatever, being like, oh, this, and you have to kind of, there's a feeling like you have to combat that, or they're like denigrating the work or something. You know, it kind of pins the way we communicate now, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is it pins it as almost like a combative way. Like every time you publish an article, you have to kind of prepare for the backlash. And again, that was always true if you're writing something controversial, but it's like even something non-controversial now, you have to kind of imagine the counter arguments, you know, beforehand, just to cover your bases almost, you know, and that kind of affects how strongly you want to word something. That affects, you know, I mean, this is making sense, or like, you know, like kind of,
Oh yeah.
yeah.
No, it all resonates. I mean, I think it's like, and I think, you know, people have asked me, because I've edited Wikipedia myself a fair amount, but not a ton. And I think part of it is I know that if I get really into it, like if I get passionate about it, it's just going to be a time suck, and it's going to take away from my writing, right? You know, and that what's hard about that is I think that editing Wikipedia a lot of times is a good use of time, because it's spreading reliable information, if, you know, ideally if you're doing it for the right reasons and in the right ways. So I mean, it's not like a vice, right? Like just, you know, like TikTok streaming, you know, just pure dopamine hits, I think. But I just like, I can't spend that much time doing it, because it'd be a time suck. And I know, knowing my personality, I get like way too involved in it, right? Same with comments on an article. It's like, I kind of feel I'm just so torn. And what I usually do is I read them, but I read them a little, like, you know, in the sense, like, I need to read them because they might make my next piece better. If someone points something out, or if someone's like, says, well, what about this? That's helpful. If it's a personal attack, or if it's sort of, you know, not, if it's just too much of a tangent, then like engaging with that comment takes away time that I could be devoting to the next article or the next story, right? So I think that, yeah, and the rules aren't clear on what to do, and then of course, just on social media generally, you know, just it's all, I don't know if you've probably taken courses and like read everything. It's like you have to do something educational, something entertaining, or something inspiring. And ever since I saw that, I was like, yeah, everything goes in that bucket. I mean, there's just a lot that's just like entertaining, but is art more than entertainment? I think it is. Like, I want my
Right.
literature to be more than just entertainment. And so the rules of social media don't always apply to literature. I don't know.
And
It's a difficult time we're living in. Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
reward structure. So if you go back
Yeah.
and forth with some, especially if it's a bigger name or maybe some type of professor or something because you wrote some article, if you go back and forth for a day or two, there are rewards for that. It's not totally without incentive. Like you do get rewarded, especially if you come out on top in the kind of public debate, if we're going to be generous and call it that, right? Like
Yeah.
kind of a social
Yeah.
media back
Yeah.
and forth. Like
Right.
it's like there is some reward at the end of it where like you either yeah through gaining kind of engagement or followers or more readers for your work or some like there
Yeah.
it is strange how we're all kind of just tossed into this. It just became the main source of getting work out there, whether creative or journalistic or anything like that. Or I mean, a lot of times you see people, they're just like content creators. They just like make YouTube videos that are just like summaries of whatever articles were published that day or something, or their
Sure,
take on it
sure.
or something. And those are like some of the most widely shared. But yeah,
And they might get a lot more views than the original article.
right,
Right?
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And they undoubtedly do, I would say. But
Yeah. It just, I mean, again, I'm not looking for any definitive answer. It's fascinating to think about how that does play into it. And there is kind of a reward structure. Like you called it a game. It is kind of like a video game. When you log on to these websites, it is kind of a video game that you're playing, and with real world consequences in a lot of ways.
sure,
too. Yeah.
sure. Yeah, well, Wikipedia is kind of an RPG, certainly role playing game. I think. Yeah, and it can get exhausting. I think and I get the urge to even John Green, Fault in Our Stars guy. He has to take a social media sabbatical every once in a while, but
Right.
in general, he's getting out. I think he's for years and years now. He's done like a video every Friday, and I just worry that the upcoming generation. I mean that would be doable, but hard for me. But like they're demanding like content every day, and I'm just like that to me I think is largely incompatible with like writing good writing, because you just need. I mean, it takes a lot of time, like to do. You're either phoning it in on your social media or you're phoning it in on the book that you're writing. So, yeah, I worry about that. And my new quote is that the internet gave us a lot of time in the sense like it's just easier. I don't need to go to the bookshop anymore. I could go to Amazon, or I can get it even more preferred bookshop.org, and it just gets shipped to me, right? And groceries and all that kind of stuff. But it also takes time away, right? Because of the expectation that you just push out this content. And going back to the push and pull thing, I think that social media for me always feels like a push, like you're just pushing out something. And I like the more intuitive, creative side that's more of a pull. So,
Yeah. There's, you talked about the courses, people are like, building your brand or something, you put out stuff there. I saw a guy that was saying, he had a friend come up to him and be like, I'm posting every day and I'm not getting much engagement. And he's just like, okay, well, I'll tell you what I'm doing with my brand. He's like, I'm posting 38 different pieces of content a week. The guy was just like,
wow.
So you go from like posting 7 pieces of content a week to 38. Yeah, that'll help you gain, some notoriety or whatever, if that's what you're going for. And that's become incredibly competitive now too, where before it was just kind of like, Kylie Jenner or whatever can post something and everybody sees it. Now even that's become even more competitive as these algorithms evolve and stuff, especially if you're in a niche space like, covering Wikipedia or something in a journalistic way. It's incredible. And I know we could go on and on about this, but you wrote an article. You wrote an article on your Substack recently called "On the Lack of Internet Novels," and I thought this was a very interesting article, kind of trying to get at this question of why is no one writing about the internet in fiction right now. So I wanted to ask, what are your theories on that? Why isn't the internet more prevalent in modern fiction, particularly in kind of thriller and crime fiction?
Yeah, and I kind of, as the idea was going in my head, I thought of it as just internet lack in modern fiction. I was thinking of that New York Times list and how so very few of the novels involve the internet. But then the place that commissioned the piece was Crime Reads, so I went a little deeper and said, well, it's not even in crime literature, right? Crime or mysteries that much. I mean, I've got a few. So I should say, I've got a piece coming out next week that I did think about 5 novels that are really engaging with the internet. One is, I'm looking at it over here. It's called No One Is Talking About This. And so first of all, I had to read those novels. I still think a lot of them the internet is just like not the main part of it. It's just kind of in the background to a
Right.
lot of it. And so I think my thesis holds that the internet is still widely unrepresented in literature. And I've got a couple theories. I mean, I think one, it's sometimes just hard to describe it, right? I mean, do you the feeling of, you know, what we're talking about, you know, pushing out your content or engaging, or, you know, the little dopamine hit that you get when the video gets likes, or kind of the confusion where you're like, well, my last video got a lot of likes and this one didn't. You know, I don't know if we've got good language to do it. I think that sometimes it's a little bit boring, frankly. You know, I think I of course, you know, with this internet, with Infopendium and the editors, I think it is rightfully like really serious because it's about the internet information crisis, and I think that it affects everybody. But if it's, you know, the email came into my inbox, I hit reply, you know, the character in that is staying in place. They're sedentary, right? And I think our brains, you know, from millions of years of evolution, we like stories where people traverse, you know, and go on long journeys, and, you know, Lord of the Rings and everything like that. It's you know, internet-based fiction is if it's just purely about the internet and it makes it seem like they're a keyboard warrior, it's not as exciting. It's not hitting that archetypal part of ourselves that wants a really long physical journey for the characters. And I think that also, you know, there's just such a need right now for escapism in fiction. Or that's I guess what the market is thinking is the need, right? Because people just want to escape into their romantasy books. Nothing against A Court of Thorn and Roses, but I think that it's for a lot of people, it's escapism, right? It's their wanting to live a different life. And so if the character in the novel is responding to the emails or scheduling social media posts or you know, watching YouTube videos or something like that, that doesn't feel like escape, because that's what a lot of people are doing in their day-to-day lives. And so they read fiction precisely to get something different than that. But to that, I would say that the sole purpose of fiction, to the extent there is a purpose, is not just to escape, right? It's to like mirror back to us like what we're doing in our lives and like what you know, kind of crises we're having in our culture. And I think that fiction, you know, can kind of cast a light on that. And I would just, you know, encourage authors but I guess readers too, to, you know, think about books that really engage with contemporary internet culture, and, you know, that can kind of create the demand that way. But it is still a, you know, a big mystery. Like I said, I've got theories, but if there was ever a time for the internet novel, you'd think it would be right now, the 21st century, not, you know, pre-2000 when the internet was, you know, less a role in our lives.
Yeah. I'm fascinated by that, and I because the theory, we love theories on this podcast. Yeah, to explore that, like just I'm doing this series where I like to do kind of like book club series where I have a friend come in. We're doing all the James Bond books and kind of going through those.
Yeah.
And one thing we talked about was he's a big spy, you know, kind of thriller fan, which is why I have him on to do this. But he was saying mobile phones kind of ruined the spy genre. And I was thinking, I was like, well, what do you mean by that? Well, he was just saying, you know, like the kind of location tracking, the GPS, like the stuff that just, when like you're trying to find an international spy and they're hiding, well, like if they have a cell phone, like a local police force could find where you are, like in a matter of seconds now. And it does kind of, the way you approach it with the way it changes the formula of stories, almost the formula, the archetype kind of, you know, hero's journey fiction, it kind of changes that because it adds this whole other element. And then I've seen other people put theories forward that are like, you know, why are so many storytellers kind of going back right now and doing the 90s or the 70s and 60s, you know, the time before we all had these things in our pockets, the access to this huge, big, you know, monolithic thing in our pockets at all times. And it's like, maybe because it is just so hard to capture something like that, like you were saying, like it is, maybe it just, but the way it's affected the stories, I think it's really not discussed in like any of the kind of industries in terms of writing and publishing right now, like how that is actually, we don't know what to do with it just yet. And maybe it's just because it's so new, we don't know quite how to portray it even, or like you said, maybe it's just difficult to portray something that big, like what it is. It's just not as exciting as you know, going to slay a dragon or something, you know.
Yeah. I mean, but I just to kind of push back on that, it's just not that new, right? It's 24, 25 years old. The internet is, you know, it's not that. But I'm going to definitely use that example of this spy novel and the issues with the smartphone, because I could see how that would make it, you know, a little bit easier to track down people. I mean, I at one point worked for the Federal Reserve, and I was thinking, oh, like what's like, you know, a drama or like a dramatic situation of someone robbing a Federal Reserve Bank, right? Getting the money there. But it just occurred to me that it would probably not be a an actual like break into the bank old style heist. Now it would be a hacking, and
Right.
it's a little bit harder to make hacking as dramatic, Slay the Dragon, Italian Job kind of story than it is like an old school heist. Yet, don't you think like a really creative novelist could make that hacking story interesting and dynamic, and talk about the characters and stuff like that? So I do think that you're probably right that a lot of authors are gravitating to the 70s or the 90s because the technological limitations then maybe make it easier to write the story. But I do almost feel that that's like a dereliction of duty on behalf of the novelist to reflect the contemporary culture and the contemporary situations, and like a lack of creativity that, like, I mean, is hacking or smartphone tracking or whatever it is, doesn't that also too have dramatic potential depending on how you write it? I don't know. It's interesting stuff. I mean, the novel, though, I would just say, in fairness, it does lag because it takes years to write a novel. So it will lag technology a little bit, just not 24, 25 years.
Yeah. And that's interesting too, in terms of like when you're robbing nowadays, it's numbers on a spreadsheet, when you can hack in and just change the numbers. The days of like the Die Hard 3, breaking into the bottom of the bank with a drill, like kind of stealing gold bars. I mean, it's changing everything with that, which is, why it's so fascinating for sure.
Right. Although maybe you could set it up where they're expecting the cyber breach, so that when the drill comes, they're surprised. I don't know. Yeah.
Right. Right. Like you doing the old school method in the new school world would make it a little more dramatic. But all right, so to move on to some writing stuff here too. Your debut novel, The Editors. It said I was researching this. You said you first called it Infodemic. And from what I was reading about it, it won a contest on Inkshares. Is that how it got published, through an open contest? And how did that work? We like to ask these questions. Like writers like to know this. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I kind of, well, I mean, just stepping back quite a bit, someone had suggested I write a nonfiction book about Wikipedia, and I was just having some issues with it because Wikipedia, when I was writing about it, it sort of seemed like the issue of the week. And I didn't feel like I could say really what I wanted to say in the form of nonfiction. I mean, there aren't a ton of Wikipedia editors, but there are about 1,500 really very highly involved, active Wikipedia editors. Now that's big in English Wikipedia. That's big for a novel, or that's big for a nonfiction book, should say. But I think it's also small compared to like a platform like TikTok that has like 1 billion users, right? Most people read Wikipedia, but they don't contribute. And I just was not able to come up with like a nonfiction story that I thought would be really gravitating of a book length. I think in the issue of the week, the journalism that I was doing, it was really interesting. And so I knew I wanted to do a novel, but I resisted it for a while. And I finally just was like, yeah, it's going to be a novel. I started writing it in February 2020. And then March of 2020, lockdowns, COVID, pandemic. And I was like, okay, well, this scary time, and I'm sure that some of those feelings came into the actual writing of the novel. But I think that it was kind of helpful to the novel in the sense that it gave a central informational conflict that characters around the world could at least be thinking about the same information or information dispute. And so that contributed to the novel. And then I saw the Inkshares had a contest. This was probably October 2020 when it started. And I had kind of done some research. And I was like, well, I'll either do this or I'll kind of go the traditional route of like sending it to agents. And so what I did is I put a few chapters up there. I kind of got my email list, which wasn't on Substack at the time. I think it was MailChimp, to like, hey, engage with these chapters. If you're interested, pre-order the book. That'd be really helpful. And so the contest was like half measured on engagement and half on like Inkshares engagement. That's one of those social media words. With the half measured on Inkshares assessment of like the quality of the chapters. And so they had like 3 finalists, and I think of those, two of those books got published. And so I think that, but then they sent an editorial letter, and they had a lot of ideas, like a ton of ideas, right? And I think that they were good ideas. But the main thing is I had kind of written it almost in the Game of Thrones style with like a lot of different editors around the world. But I mean, Game of Thrones, not in fantasy form or, not in his style of writing, but just the fact that there are many viewpoint characters.
Right.
And I was encouraged, and I think it was good for the book ultimately, to get it down to 4 viewpoint characters. That's better than 8 or 9 or 12 or whatever it was. And I think that process took a long time to get it reduced, and it was really only, let's say, around November or December of 2023 they were like, okay, we think this is ready for publication August 2024. And then so that signing that contract back in, what was that, 2021, I almost thought like, here, we're ready to go. And of course, there's a lot more revision remaining.
Yeah, absolutely. The craziest story I heard, we like to ask writers this because, we have a lot of writers, aspiring writers that listen, and it was just like, how did you get this done? Because it does seem impossible sometimes. Craziest story, I had a writer on here that said he literally, he had a Substack and stuff, but he just tweeted out, like, does anyone want to publish my novel? And a small press camp was like, yeah, we'll do it. Like, we like your Substack, and so like, that's how it happened. Like, it's just kind of crazy now. Like, send to a contest, or you do the old school, like soliciting agents or anything like that. Like, it's just kind of, you never know how that happens. So yeah, that's great. I love that. I love that story. That's
yeah. Well, and I did submit like a short story, and through that I now have an agent who's helping me with some other writing projects. And but the one thing, because I've got a good friend in New York who now is an agent, is like, even getting the agent doesn't mean like you're set. I mean, it has to go on sub, and it's a lengthy time frame, and so everyone's just kind of making up as the point, making up as the rules as they go, and the tweeting to the small press might be an idea for another book. So we'll see.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You never know. Yeah, you never know. Another thing we like to ask, how is the book tour going? We like to know these sorts of things on this podcast. And I know the idea of a book tour is quite different than it was even 10 years ago. But how has that been for you? I think a lot of writers don't even get a book tour. Like, barely get anything. You have to kind of DIY it. But yeah, how was that for you? How did it work out? Was it fun, terrible, all that?
Yeah, well, I think that I think that a lot of it was like the small press publisher and myself just like configuring, like, hey, we've got this event this date, let's do an event, that kind of thing. I think that because I have the Substack, I've got an audience in like certain cities, and sometimes it's just friends that show up to different cities. I think that but I live here in Dallas. I think that probably actually, because of a rescheduling, it ended up being my second event. And that was probably the largest one by just sheer number of people that I knew that came. And that was kind of the friends and family one. But then I had, because the column was written through Slate had an event with New America in DC, and I was able to go to that. And so it was St. Louis, because just from the college connection, reaching out to bookstores there and that community, Dallas, DC, and then London. There was a university that had interest, and I think that's actually kind of, I guess I would have advice to, like, play up the university connections, because a lot of times they have like a budget and like a per diem, right, and that can make it make it easier for travel, and then just the last thing, the thing that I think is interesting is what moves the needle in terms of sales, because even though it's a little interesting to talk about, it's like we live in a capitalist economy, like people are always thinking about that. I don't know if the live events do it as much as, because they're not as scalable as the online things, but I can post clips from the event, whether it's a long form like the interview that I did in DC, or like I've got some short clips coming out of things that came out in that interview, and those are watched by a lot more people, right? So I think whenever book events you should have a virtual aspect that kind of let it be more scalable than that individual event. But I mean, it's fun. I mean, I think that because the Kindle version of the book was out, like a lot of people at the events had read things, and they asked some like really, really good questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm fascinated by that too, because I think that that's part of the media's landscape kind of shifting almost daily now in terms of this. Podcasts. I had a guy on here who wrote his debut memoir, and he was he had a publisher, he had a little bit of funds to do some type of tour, but he was mostly doing it DIY. And he said what he was doing, he's in some cases, DMing people on social media or even guessing people's emails. And he started getting on a lot of kind of comedy podcasts, and and he said that moved the needle for sales more than any type of like reading or like, bookstore event and stuff, which is just fascinating how that works. Because, you think of like the audience for a comedy podcast, are they going to be clicking the link and buying the book, after they hear you? Apparently they will. At least enough of them will that it moves the needle a little bit on like at least the Amazon rankings and all that. That's important now. But yeah, it's just always fascinating because every kind of story now, like it is kind of, we've been talking about it the whole time, the kind of economic change with the internet and all of that. It is kind of changing things. And I like Bret Easton Ellis. I listen to his podcasts and stuff, and he talks about this all the time. But of course, he's in a different league. He's grandfathered in. He's a huge, been a huge writer since he was like in his 20s. And he talks about how even he notices that like the funds are less. They're not sending you like these private cars anymore. Like when you get out of the airport, to do a tour, like it is kind of different world than it was even 10 years ago for that. So we're just always fascinated about how that works. But yeah.
Well, and I think I'm trying to be grateful, even though like I kind of miss the old school publishing model. It'd be cool to have a private car or a 10 city tour all paid by the publisher, that kind of thing. But I would say the example of that sometimes like my Gen Z friends or like, people who ask me questions about like journalism, they're like, oh, I want to write something freelance for the New York Times. Well, a lot of times those freelance budgets have dried up, even compared to the way they were 2015, 2016 when I was getting started. And so I sometimes I'm saying, hey, I think you have a pretty good story and a pretty good pitch. I would pitch all of these sites, try it, but then maybe you just put it on your Substack at the end because the model is different, right? There's just not as much freelance budget anymore. And so there's some things I benefited from that the younger generation doesn't. And then we like to think that like the older generation had it super easy. So,
right. Yeah. People always we taught in the very beginning, right? Faulkner, Hemingway, like the reason they were writing journalism, well, it was a little bit more consistent work than publishing a classic novel or something. That's why they were doing it.
Right. Yeah. And I've got that with my, legal career, of course. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. And we like to ask this too, like your latest book, The Editors, where does the title come from? First that. And I know we've kind of said this already, but yeah.
Sure. Well, I had Infodemic, I was just thinking, I'm going to, but the book was coming out in 2024 as opposed to 2020 and 2021 when I wrote it. And I was like, people have pandemic fatigue. And it's really not even just exclusively about the pandemic anyway, right? But I like this title of The Editors because it's a little mysterious. I mean, what editors are we talking about? It catches some people off guard because they're thinking about newspaper or book publishing editors, and I just mean these volunteers who edit a encyclopedia. I like, so I kind of like the crypticness of it, crypticness to crypticality. No, the mystery of it, and also the fact that because some people think, well, that's a scary word, editors, and it's like, well, I mean, it can be. It's just I like the different interpretations people have of it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I love it. We always like to ask that too, because sometimes it's hard to come up with titles that encapsulate like an entire book and stuff. So we always just, how'd you come up with it? Yeah. Another writing question we like to ask: What is your writing routine like? What's your kind of go-to?
So I'm a morning person, and I think that's just. I do think people have like a circadian rhythm or whatever. Some people write more in the morning. Some people write, I wrote this morning. Some people write in the evenings because that's when they come energy wise. But for me, it's like I need to do it in the morning, right, when I have the most creative energy and before I check my email and get and pinged with a bunch of things at work, right? And so I try to make a cup of coffee because I just want it to be as easy for myself as I can, the writing, and then like read for like 15 minutes a fiction, right? So that's like my tune-up. It's a little bit different than maybe normal reading because sometimes I'm like scribbling in the margin something that I think would be relevant for the scene I'm about to write, or I think that it's a little bit more like I'm not reading for pleasure. It's just kind of like, and I'm literally setting a timer with my Alexa to keep it going. And then afterwards I move and then transition to writing, and I try to write at least for an hour. And on my best days I can get 2 hours in before, but that's hard. And I think when I was doing really, really heavy revisions and I needed to push it, I got up to like 4 hours. but you have to wake up really early to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or, have, maybe that's more of a weekend type thing. And so but I think that at pretty much every hour I get up, maybe stretch, get a cup of water or something like that. I think that some people really like the word count, and I think I might have to start doing that just for this one thing that's going kind of slow. I need to get the word count up, like a spreadsheet with word count, but I've just never been able to do it so far. I just think of it as units of time. Like I put an hour into this, that's pretty good, right? And I don't know, I grew up playing piano. I wonder if you have to like this contest where you get like a sticker if you do an hour of practice. Yeah. And I was like, maybe I'm kind of doing that in my head, just giving myself a mental sticker for practicing that much. But it also could be the law firm experience where everything was tracked with time. And, I at one point had a spreadsheet, but now it's just kind of like a tally. Like I got my hour done for the day and, or 2 hours, that's kind of the way I do it in the morning. And it's a good sense of productivity in the morning. But even that's hard because a lot of people are like, well, I need to exercise or do something else in the morning. I was like, well, no, I have to exercise in the evenings, right? So if I'm going to do it. So it's fun to talk about, but when it's best, it's just pretty much on autopilot.
Yeah. And this is daily, right? You do it pretty much daily, give or take.
Yeah, I give myself a break sometimes on weekends, but really only one of the 2 weekend days. And the other I try to do, maybe instead of the 2 hours, maybe that's a full 4 hour morning, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we like to ask that because I think there's the labor that goes into it. There's kind of an illusion about it's easy. Like, no. Like this takes, hours and hours and hours and years of doing that every day. And it's just fascinating. We like to hear different writers have different styles and all of that. Yeah, like kind of some people it's as simple as making a cup of coffee and sitting down in the morning. And other times people have these elaborate rituals, which whatever gets you into the grind. Yeah. But yeah, we love hearing it on this podcast. That's for sure.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Well, I love talking about craft stuff. I mean, I think the other thing that I'm a little different with, and again, I'm looking at my writing desk over there, is I do a fair amount of handwriting, which is not just older millennial, that's just older, but I think that I'm going to be staring at a screen all day anyway at work, so I like to not do as much screen as I can. But then sometimes when it gets a little slow, I need to pull out the laptop here and do it. get going faster. If my brain's going faster than my hand is. Yeah,
absolutely. I love that. You're the second person that we've had in terms of authors that have said that the handwriting they prefer, which I love. I think that's great. Yeah, because the screen time is I don't want to say it's a killer, but it does affect the output. It does affect the energy. Your eyes hurt if you're staring at a screen all day doing that kind of job. And it helps the writing. Yeah.
Yeah. We like coffee. Coffee's important. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. Uh-huh. And we like to ask this one again, for all writers that come on. How do you make a living? Do you make any money off the literature? You said you already have the day job as a lawyer. Is that basically the source of income?
Yeah, it's definitely primary at this point. I think that, I make actually the character of Morgan in the book. She sometimes was like, oh, I made a few $100 on this story. This, that was slightly similar for me when I freelance writing. It's like, okay, you work really hard, get paid like $350 for this article, right? So it's not sustainable because the dollar amount's not that high, and it's a little bit like, okay, you can't predict it, right? But I think that the book, I got a little bit more for this book than that. And then there's an audiobook coming out, and Audible has, and I'm super excited about the audiobook of The Editors is coming out at Thanksgiving, and that gives you an advance, which is kind of neat. Nice. But I would say, I don't want to get into like all the numbers, but I would say we don't need any numbers. Yeah. Right now, my writing's like, oh, maybe, with all the writing I've done, maybe I could buy a car, right? But it's not like, a mortgage, right?
Right, yeah.
And the car is definitely not a Tesla or anything like that, like it's a used car maybe. But, and so, in terms of my career, it's just like, okay, well, I think that what I like about it, though, is that if I were a journalist, I think, whether it's social media or whatever, you just have to just go, get these stories out. I think now and full-time journalist, I think now part-time, I can pick the stories that I'm interested in. I can write the books that I want. And, I have a little bit more liberty to pick my projects. And so there might be a point where I'm like going to pull a John Grisham and say I'm just going to do this full time. And but even he is saying that he sold more books before the internet than after. So yeah,
Right.
it's just a different time that we live in. So
Yeah, yeah. We like to ask that because it is kind of, we like to dissolve the illusion that every writer out there is making millions of dollars because they have a book in a bookstore or won some award.
Yeah.
We had the memoirist and poet Nick Flynn on last week, and he was saying the same thing. He's like, "Look, I got to work. Like, I have to teach, at a school. I have to run workshops, private workshops, and stuff. Like, that's how you make the income. You're not going to make a living off of this stuff, even though occasionally you'll get a little bump, and it's nice. Yeah." But we all like, writing podcasts, we like to know that kind of stuff.
For sure. Yeah. And I've even thought about that with teaching. It's like, that could be good, but then maybe the material of your life is like the student teacher relationships that you're having. And that's why you end up with novelists who are writing about writing and being writing professors, which I think is a little, maybe not what the general reading public wants to hear. So.
Right, the college campus novel and the kind of having an affair or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to writers out there who are just starting out or maybe trying to build something on their own? This is another one we like to ask all the writers. Right.
I think that there were some things that I had when I was 22, 23, like really passionate about writing that right out of college that I was right about, and some things that I was wrong about. I think that I was right in that you do need to be really enthusiastic and passionate. You just got to have that initial burst of energy to kind of keep you going. I think that what I was wrong about is I didn't realize that it is so much of a long game. You need to, to make this book. I thought that it was going to be a 2-year thing, and it was ended up being a 4-year project to make it the best it could be, right? I think that so it's a lot more about stamina. I think it's a lot more about the getting in that hour or 2 hours, get your stickers every day, right? Than that. I think that looking back, I probably should have done more social media, more connections, more podcasts. You always want to do. You think you should do more of that. And I think that, but it's very hard to see, the trajectory of things, right? Like me, I wrote that one article about the subway kids relating to Wikipedia. And then all of a sudden I've written like 100 articles about Wikipedia, like over different locations, right? I would not have expected that. So when you get an opportunity to like report on a niche or something, maybe just go for it, right? And just keep going. And then the last thing is, and I think I was kind of trying to touch on it when I was talking about that 15 minutes of reading a day. Of course, to be a better writer, I need to read more than 15 minutes a day. But the reason I do that is to keep me humble and realize, well, at the very least, I'm going to have these 15 minutes of fiction reading a day. I think that what I worry about is, and it's not, I'm not blaming Gen Z or the younger generation by any means, but I think that there's this culture of like, okay, no, you're a creator. You're not like actually studying, not reading and stuff like that. Well, and that makes for bad writing, right? You're not going to be as good unless you read, right? And so I think that, I think of it as like my non-creative period, which was probably 23 to close to 30. I wasn't writing that much, but I was reading a lot during that time. And I think that when I came out on the other end and started, writing a lot more often, I think that was because I just started reading a lot, in audiobooks. I'm not, discriminating against format. I had a long commute, so a lot of it was audio. And so I just really encourage people to read more if they can and understand how that makes you a better writer, creator, whatever you want to call yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Especially, when you have a day job, you have to do the writing, you're doing freelance journalism still too.
Yeah.
And all of that, you have to carve out a time, even if it's only 15 minutes to get that motivation. Like you said, you're reading it, you're thinking up techniques, like all of that's filling your head as you read for those even 15, 20 minutes a day. It's everything. And going off of that, we like to ask writers that come on here, are you reading anything good, watching anything good, listening to anything good? Kind of what's filling your head as you go about your day? Kind of what are you taking in? And this could be anything from, great literary novels to garbage, trash TV or whatever, what are you? What's filling Steven's head right now?
Yeah, well, I have been, because of my next book, I've been kind of trying to read good first-person mysteries, and the editors, I wrote it in closed third person, but there are multiple viewpoints, and so I was just trying to write this next one. I'm just like looking at like what are the probably a better way to think about it, but like the strengths and the limitations of the first person, and how can you use those, and how can you show voice and things like that. And so I've been reading. I'm looking over here, The Secret History by Donna Tartt.
Oh yeah.
And then also, and I just finished In the Woods by Tana French, which is it's the Dublin Murder series, and she has a different viewpoint character for each novel in that series. So first person mysteries. I actually just pulled out to look at. I'm looking again over at my thing here. The Sun Also Rises, because I wanted to look at a party scene. But I think the theme recently is first person. Right. Narrators, and I think that and I'm kind of big on physical books, because like I can tag that particular section and come back to it, and I think that's what's really nourishing me right now. Now, the TV you asked, there is some show that I've been wanting to watch, English Teacher, but I have not yet dived into it. And TV is another thing where I feel like it could be like Wikipedia or social media. The more I watch, the more I get a time suck. So it's not that I'm opposed to watching TV. It's just that I just feel like I could lose some of my creativity that way. Absolutely. Creative time.
Yeah. That's a big one too. Be like, I watch, well, even if you're watching like a great, well-written, drama or something like HBO, sure. Prestige TV, it still isn't quite the same thing as reading and kind of filling your head with that, Yeah. And the final question we like to ask writers that come on here, if you feel free to share it, right? What are you working on now? I know we've had writers that are superstitious before. They're like, I don't like to share it, but if you feel free to share it, what's taking up your time, your creative energy right now?
I've got two kind of projects that I'm working on, and the first one, I might be the superstitious writer and just say it's the travel novel, and it's related to travel, and I was able to do some travel on the book tour and afterwards, and so I'm sure it's inspired by that. But I think that there's a little bit of The Sun Also Rises in there too, just having fun in Europe, decadence. It's kind of in there, but I won't get it too much into the plot of that, just because I think that it's the energy thing, that superstitious thing that you're talking about. The other thing is I did work, as I said, at the Federal Reserve for a while, and I thought about a mystery set at a Federal Reserve Bank. Could be kind of timely and topical, not to chase a trend too much, but a lot of people are talking about the Fed, and I think that I would want it, if I wrote something, it wouldn't be a nonfiction book, it would be a novel, and so I might be working on that too. But I've been switching. I've been doing more of the travel novel lately than the murder mystery, and this is the first time I've never really done like two novels or two books at the same time. I think maybe it's just I got like the creative burst for the other one, and so I shifted that way.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think a lot of people have said that that's a good way to not get stuck too. When you have multiple projects going, like if you get stuck on one, okay, just go to the other one, and then if you get stuck on that, you can flip back and forth. I don't know. I mean, I've done some of that. I mean, I guess it can go both ways. You can be negative or positive with how you're doing it. But yeah, I think that's great. Great.
Right. Yeah, and I'm trying to keep the nonfiction reporting too. I think that with the Wikipedia journalism is like, well, I kind of got the book. That was like, getting that off my chest is sort of like, okay, I'm good. But I'm sure there's going to be the next big controversy on Wikipedia. Like, hey, could you write something about that, or would you be interested in doing it? One other reason that I've been doing less journalism there is when I first started, no one was really talking about Wikipedia from a journalistic standpoint, or it was just getting a lot less coverage than like Twitter and Google and things like that. Now, people, and they're doing a great job. They're describing it on Twitter or not Twitter, on TikTok. And there's this whole site. Her name's Annie Rarda, and she does Depths of Wikipedia, and she's covering like interesting things. And so I kind of feel like people are taking it, right? Which is good. Yeah, carrying it in different forms.
I was going to ask about it. Like, if you feel, have you ever been approached, or have you thought about doing like kind of a nonfiction kind of collection of your work on Wikipedia and all that, as like a kind of nonfiction Wikipedia book, like kind of collecting your various articles, and again, like the one about historians and stuff like that, into like kind of a nonfiction book? Or
Yeah, I haven't had that, which would be kind of neat. That'd be kind of cool to repurpose some of that and kind of update it. I did, so in like law school, you read cases, but in business school, they read cases that are designed off business issues. And a business school in Canada reached out and said, "Hey, would you write a business school case about Wikipedia and AI?" And what I like about that is it's not, it's sort of, I mean, it's not fictional because it's like what's happening with Wikipedia and AI, but it's told in the form of a narrative. Like Wikipedia has this and has these policies, and now there's these AI chat bots and things like that. Like how should Wikipedia approach it? And the reason I'm definitely going to do that, but I think it's also neat from like the future historian perspective. Like maybe they'll look back and say, well, that was a really, Wikipedia was dealing with some thorny issues around AI, same as we all are. And to your point about the memoirist and the poet who gets some extra income from teaching and public speaking and stuff like that. That's kind of my version of that. It's kind of like consulting on a business school case.
Have to. All right. Stephen, this has been fantastic. Where can people find your stuff? Where do you want people to find your books, your writing, all of that?
Yeah, well, the book's available on Amazon, Bookshop, wherever you get your books. For my writing, I've got my Substack. You can find that on my website, stephenharrison.com. And then in terms of social media, since we've been talking about that, I'm most active on Instagram. My handle there is Stephen B. Harrison, and doing a little bit more YouTube. I find like the younger audience is really engaging there. And you can find that probably just by Googling Stephen Harrison Wikipedia.
Fantastic. And that'll all be linked below, listeners, as well. That's all in the description. All right. Thank you so much for taking the time, Stephen.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Andrew. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy
Bored.
I may say the male is entirely hostile. No! Inner
Resources.
life, friends, is boring. We must not say so. Are you radioactive now?
Inner.
Resources, American resources.
Being bored?
Some activities are intentional, right?
It shows such a lack
Heavy.
of gratitude for life. Bored. I aspire to boredom, I
Heavy.
should say.
Bored. Heavy.
I am heavy
Bored.
Has you the night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.
If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Bored. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavybored. That's right, Heavy Bored is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, Jerk Shop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavybored.